Hello everyone to the fourth episode of the Q&A. We only have 3 questions to answer this time, but these are ranking questions, and I feel the need to justify my decisions, so I am dedicating a full video. Specifically, the 3 rankings we're doing today are my top 4 Eastern Roman Empresses, top 10 emperors, and who I think is the worst emperor. Alright, let's go. People usually ask about who are the best emperors, but in your opinion, who would be on your Mount Rushmore, top 4, of best Eastern Roman empresses? Of course, this can include ones that didn't rule as the sole head of state. Thank you for thinking about gender equality for a moment. Eastern Roman empresses are criminally underrated. I can easily say 4, but ranking them would be a bit harder. Well, let's try anyway. Number 4. Zoe Carbonopsina. This coal-eyed beauty, mother of Constantinos VII, was more than just a pretty face. She also had a sound political mind. During her regency, when the empire was on the brink of war with Simeon of Bulgaria, in a very bad state, she managed to deal with all other fronts with insane efficacy and delivered concrete results. Her armies were very successful in Italy and Armenia against the Arabs, but failed in Bulgaria due to a slight hiccup when dealing with their Pecheneг allies and a betrayal from the admiral Romanos Lekapinos. If Lekapinos wasn't such a competent emperor later, I would genuinely detest him for tarnishing Zoe's reign like that. But yes, back to Zoe. I think she showed remarkable sense and success for a girl who was brought into the imperial circle originally just because of her fertility and prettiness. Maybe her being the niece of the distinguished Admiral Himerius may have had something to do with her later military achievements for the empire, but still, in an age where you don't teach women strategy, it's really impressive, even if she had experienced advisors like Leon Phocas. She also managed to protect her son from venomous power-hungry officials just waiting to pounce on the vulnerable Macedonian prince. So, that's a powerful maternal figure we may all respect right there. 3. Eleni Gozini. In general, Paleologian era empresses were much more interesting than their husbands, some of whom were very incompetent and idiotic. Eleni stood out particularly interesting. See, I never did introduce her in my history series, but if you watched my latest Women's Day special on the 10 coolest Paleologian era ladies, you will notice I ranked her on top. I went far more in detail on why she's the best in that video, but let's summarize again my reasoning. She was the empress of Ioannis V Paleologos, one of the worst emperors, if not one of the worst family men also, in Roman history. She endured him for more time than any woman could reasonably be asked to, showing much patience and virtue in her character, and she was the starkest contrast you could get from Ioannis, who kept screwing over his sons due to his incompetent politics, especially poor Manuel II, who had served as a Hungarian hostage, had to run all over the Mediterranean to save father's ass, imprisoned for his filial piety when his brother started a civil war. Well, Eleni was nothing like that. She was a good mom. She loved and supported Manuel as a kid. Manuel loved and trusted her in return when he was emperor. She served as Empress Regent in 1393, during a time when Manuel already had a wife, and she was the main dialogue partner in one of Manuel's philosophical works, in which Manuel, one of the wisest Roman emperors in history, was humbly seeking advice and teachings from his mother. And that is another thing Eleni should be remembered for, her erudition. She was eloquent, well-educated, and graceful, so you can see where Manuel got his smart genes from. Manuel's tutor, the most important Roman polymath of the era, Dimitrios Gidonis, frequently corresponded with the empress and praised her for her literary talents, and it is no small compliment when Gidonis is the one giving them. And I may be biased here because most of you may have noticed the affection I show for women of letters, so Eleni is up here despite not being a very active political actor for the empire. But hey, it's my ranking, in it, bruv. 2. Pulcheria. She was the only reason the Theodosian dynasty wasn't a full failure in the East. At age 14, she took it as her own responsibility to properly educate her baby brother Theodosius II into a good Christian emperor, instead of letting the courtiers get to him like the tragedy that was their father, Arcadius. Whatever your view on Theodosius II, we can all agree he was miles better than Arcadius or Honorius. Bulgaria managed to remain incredibly independent and influential by simply swearing a vow of chastity. So she was able to have a hand in East Roman government, and she was able to even secure the succession of her dynasty after Theodosius died childlessly by entering into a platonic marriage with Marcianus, with whom she also convened the Council of Chalcedon and set very important definitions for Orthodox Christianity. All in all, Bulgaria was a kick-ass ruler like many other Theodosian women. I suppose same with Palaiologos. When the male rulers were lacking in competency, the female ones naturally rise out of necessity. 1. Theodora the Great, Empress of Justinian. No need to elaborate, I think we all saw it coming. Her story is a classic rags to riches tale, like that of Justinian and his uncle, so they were already pretty much a perfect match for each other. The romance between Justinian and Theodora is already one of the stuff of legends. So, let's see what Empress Theodora offered the empire. We could either believe the scandals Procopius collected in the secret history about her being an evil prostitute who confiscated everything from every competent Roman in the administration, or we can look critically at her feats. She was the one who supported Justinian through every challenge in his reign, be it the Nika riots, during which she shamed him into staying and fighting for the purple, or the plague, when she literally reigned solo for a long time when he was comatose from the buboes. Much of Justinian's achievements then must have also been the result with a slight hand from Theodora. Because, trust me, you don't perform that well unless you have a soulmate like that. And Justinian's performance declined significantly after Theodora's death in 548. He literally never recovered from that. We also know that Theodora, a Miaphysite Christian, was a mediating influence between the very staunchly Chalcedonian Orthodox Justinian and the churches of Egypt and Syria. So she is still commemorated as a saint in those communities. Who knows what Justinian might have done if Theodora didn't temper him down a bit. Finally, we see how Theodora massively improved the situation for the female half of the empire, helping to reform prostitutes and working towards giving women more rights. She predated the existence of feminism, but I think we may all agree that she was an absolute queen, and she slayed in that regard. So these are my top 4 empresses. Obviously we could yap on for hours and hours more, but time is pressing and we still have 10 emperors to go through. I can sense your anticipation already. Since this is one of the most popular Byzantine topics out there, I will have to presume you mostly know the stories of these Vasileis, and I won't have to recapitulate too much for you. I will mainly address what I like about each one, and common contradictory opinions you may have. I am also ranking a lot just based on personal preference. If we look purely at stats, I will do another video altogether because I am keeping maths out of this one. And I am not including emperors of Trebizond. So, sorry Manuel Megascominos, you'll get a chance to shine on my list another time. What are your top 10 best or worst emperors? Number 10. Ioannis Tsimiskis. This man is the textbook definition of bravado and riz. He came, he saw, and he conquered, like Caesar. Whatever he wants, he could achieve, and in a flashy way as well. He learned how to be so insanely competent in the military from his uncle, Nikephoros Phokas. But unlike Phokas, he also learned how to be politically adept, how to handle the crowd, which is such a crucial factor of the Roman political system. That's how he managed to murder Phokas with no repercussions whatsoever. Blame everything on Theophano because of course it was the woman's fault, duh. Then sit comfortably on the throne by midnight and be out fighting the invading Rus by the morrow. He could defeat the Rus and conquer the eastern half of Bulgaria as a side quest, all within 1 year. There is some serious natural gift in this man. If only he had more permanence, he would have done even more good for the empire and not left it in such a bad state with civil wars to his successor Vasilios II. Zemeckis' flame burned brightly, like his colorful personality. It's just a shame it burned out too quickly. Number 9. Konstantinos IV. So, usually, we don't hear about him a lot, and I think this era of Iraklius is way too underrated. Any of the Dark Age emperors all deserve massive respect for holding on to Romania as best as they could, and Konstantinos was one of the most successful. He handled the first Arab siege of Constantinople, got Greek fire for the Roman navy, and inflicted such a defeat on Muawiyah that the Umayyads had to sign a favorable peace treaty to the Romans, and it was one of the empire's first real wins against the seemingly invincible caliphate. He was a saint, fixing the Monothelite controversy which his grandfather Heraclius started and divided the empire with, in such hard times, and he showed himself capable in the military despite his sickness, reconquering the rich province of Cilicia from the Arabs in 685. Which laid foundations for his son Justinian II's counterattacks in the northern Levant. See, Konstantinos IV was the most worthy heir of Heraclius. He did so much in his short reign, didn't have severe anger issues like his father or son, and his only mistake was allowing the formation of the Bulgarian Khanate on his turf. But perhaps the pressing situation in the east could excuse this. Plus, Konstantinos only failed his campaign against the Bulgars due to a sudden episode of his illness. Very solid emperor overall. If Justinian II was less psycho, we may have seen a Roman recovery much sooner. Number 8. Leon III the Syrian. You see, Justinian was, sadly, just that psycho. And despite all his goodwill, he dragged the empire down to maybe one of its lowest points before the late Middle Ages, the 20 Years' Anarchy. And it was this little Syrian kid from nowhere, which Justinian befriended, that saved the empire from this downward spiral. He became known as Leon III, and we can all say the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople was one of the greatest challenges the Romans faced, and their resistance, and victory, one of the most memorable in their military history. Another great battlefield triumph Leon got for the empire was the Battle of Akrinon, the first proper field engagement the Romans won over the Arabs, and one of the nails in the coffin for the mighty Umayyad Caliphate, since they lost so many of their best soldiers to the emperor. Leon also improved the empire's administration and legislation, giving the first major update to the Corpus Juris Civilis of Justinian. In a word, he stabilized the empire very much, faced the Umayyads like David faced Goliath, all in one mess of an era. He did start iconoclasm, and that was something that demonized him and his dynasty, but no one is perfect. Number 7. Ioannis Komnenos. Alright, before I get stoned for putting Kalou Ioannis this low on the list, allow me to defend myself and say what I love about the second Komnene Emperor first. He was stubborn, he was iron-willed. He personally led campaigns every year into enemy-infested territory, and through all of this, he managed to take back the coasts of Anatolia, city by city, fort by fort. He was committed to his father Alexios' plans for the empire, and he executed them to perfection, or as perfect as he could before his untimely death. Ioannis, you could have gotten Antioch back from the Normans. You were so close to permanently ridding Bohemon's legacy from Romania. But like every other Komnenos, Ioannis was not just a macho warrior. He knew his way around court and diplomacy, and he handled the Sultanate of Rome very well and peacefully so he could focus on the Danish mandates. Plus, his alliance with the Holy German Empire was also a commendable effort. Barely any civil unrest in his reign, unless you count the plots of his younger brother, Isakios, and even Edward Gibbon liked him. Overall, I think everyone has a positive image of him, but I place him here because that's just it. He was a good emperor, but had a good inheritance too, being handed the empire from Alexios, who literally dragged Romania back from the dead and started a new age for it. There's nothing incredibly novel about his stratagems or policies. He continued what worked and put in extra effort. As I am ranking on personal preference, you'll see that I tend to like emperors who actually showed some innovation, some cool successful initiative, especially when they managed to turn back the tides of decline. So I do adore Ioannis, but not as much as I adore his son or father. Number 6. Vasilius II the Bulgar Slayer. Little is needed to elaborate on why he's up here. Every single best Roman emperor's list I've seen includes him. Vasilius had everything you want in an emperor. A noble lineage, a triumph over his scheming relatives and courtiers, an inspiring character development, from unshored and inexperienced young king to a harsh but fair ruler, not loved, but respected by his Roman people and subjects in Aleppo and Bulgaria. And of course, countless victories to his name, mainly the reconquest of Bulgaria and Balkans for the empire. This lasting achievement of the Bulgar Slayer ensured that the northern frontier of the empire became the least of his successor's problems, and the funniest region in Europe once more saw Roman hegemony until the Anguilla dynasty. Although known to be a very austere soldier, Vasilius also spread Roman power through mostly non-military means to the extreme north and extreme south, to the Kievan Rus and the Fatimids, after a few initial engagements in battle. I am more critical of his expansion into Armenia and Georgia, because even if he extended Rome's borders into regions not even once under Trajan's control, it was one of the causes for the easy Seljuk incursions later into Anatolia, although I do agree he couldn't have saw it coming. So yes, the Bulgar Slayer was sort of a model emperor, a living legend, married to his army, which the later Komneni took as their example. Especially Ioannis, I would say, in terms of just hard, relentless campaigning, because that was how Vasilius reduced the Bulgarians, year after year, fort after fort. Later Romans did remember the times of the Bulgar Slayer as one of their golden periods, and would reminisce of Vasilius when the Bulgarians or others caused troubles for the empire again. Alas, he never designated a worthy heir. Surely, he knew his brother Constantinos VIII wouldn't outlive him for very long. It's bad to encourage liaisons, but please, Vasilius, leave the army for a day and visit a woman, I beg you. You could have been higher on the list. Number 5. Manuel Komnenos. Oh yes, I know, shame me for liking Manuel, this demon who dared focus on anywhere else besides Anatolia. And just 24 years after his death, we got the sack of Constantinople, the worst of the Komneni. Hold your stones, let me explain. I think the main problem with Manuel is that of Vasilius, the problem of progeny, of a stable succession to guard his legacy. Manuel screwed around a lot with women, but unfortunately, he produced only bastards in his youth, and his legitimate male heir was born too late. Alexius II, if just actually an adult in the 1180s, just literally had to do nothing to ruin Manuel's legacy, and it could have been preserved. But ignoring how Manuel couldn't keep his own achievements alive for even 2 decades after his death, I think all of us can appreciate at least in his life. Manuel was very much an overachiever. He had the capacity to do a lot, and he had so much charm that everyone believed he was invincible too. Manuel created an aura, not just for the Romans, but literally everyone around. The Latins, the Turks, the Crusader states, the Ayyubids, and all of this is founded on fact and experience of how Manuel projected his power, not only as Roman Emperor, but also the Lord of the entire Christian ecumeny. He could be omnipresent, from church councils to the most lavish diplomatic receptions you'll ever see. He dazzled his fellow rulers, Christian or Muslim, and he made them want to cooperate with him. He was just as well of a soldier as his other family members, Ioannis and Alexius, and led the Roman legions by example. He inspired his troops with his personal vigor and prowess, like even Latins will praise him for his strength and valor, but he knew also which commanders to trust, like his brilliant nephew, Andronikos Kondostephanos for Hungary, and Konstantinos Kalamanos for Armenia and the Crusader states. In every field, be it military, politics, diplomacy, or the church, Manuel proved himself to be a natural leader of men. His expeditions were a hit or miss, but generally they brought prestige and revenue for the empire. We shouldn't be judging him just for the miss at Myriokephalon, which he actually mitigated quite well after the defeat. In the way Manuel peaked the Roman soft power expansion, well, I've already went at length in another Q&A response, but yes, that's also one of the reasons I like him. But of course we must know our limits. While Manuel was nice for the state, he wasn't really good for his own. He favored the Latins too much in his empire, both by pronia and merchant privileges, and his family life was a mess. He left the loose end of Andronikos Komnenos, plus, he also did incest. So, top 5 is the best I could do for Manuel Komnenos. Number 4. Justinian the Great. The GOAT. If the Corpus Juris Civilis, the Renovatio Imperii, the Hagia Sophia, the start of a native Roman silk industry, the flourishing of arts and cultures under him, the wildest slanders of court in Roman history, well, if none of these could convince you that Justinian is one of the top emperors, I don't know what will. Achievements-wise, Justinian is one of the best on the list, but I have my problems with him, namely some of his more autocratic tendencies to suppress dissent, so he's not really in the top 3. Number 3. Heraclius. I remember that in my video about Heraclius' reign, I already sufficiently expressed my great admiration for this emperor who lived too long. Heraclius had a story like an epic tragedy. He saved the Roman Empire from the Persians just to lose half of it to the Arabs again. He gambled the fate of Rome on the last legions he had, and they traversed mountains and fields just to get the Ctesiphon on the negotiation table, but all of that seemed as if it was for nothing once Islam rose. And when he restored the true cross to Jerusalem, he really hoped he could bring about Christian unity once more, so he and Patriarch Sergius advanced the monotheletism theory. But that didn't work out well and divided the imperial church with Eastern churches even more. So this kind of struggling towards the light but ending up losing everything, well, this is a sentiment we can all relate with, and we feel for Heraclius a lot. and we appreciate him for at least trying his best, unlike his predecessor Phocas. Some might say that Heraclius was the main villain for the Persian War. He started a civil war for his own power and toppled Phocas when the state was at war, and the Persians only began to really advance and opt for permanent conquest in the empire once Heraclius came, as if he aggravated the situation. I think this kind of view is fair, but also a bit wrongly attributing cause and correlation. Just because the timing seemed bad doesn't necessarily imply Heraclius was a culprit. But to each their own. Now, another key reason I like Heraclius a lot is that his reign was what we would call the beginning at the end of late antiquity. A mouthful, yes, I know. Under him, the Roman state saw its past grandeur flourish again on equal terms with their ancient rivals, the Persians, and Heraclius was a larger-than-life figure that found his way into many medieval Christian and Islamic legends. To put it simply, under him, Rome still felt like an imperium, rather than just Romania, a nation of Romans. Plus, beautiful late antique aesthetics for his reign. Genuinely, Heraclius used to be one of my favorite emperors when I was younger. Number 2. Alexius Komnenos. Well, you probably saw it coming. I love the Komneni, and of course, I love the patriarch of their dynasty. What really strikes me about Alexius is how creative he was, how originally he handled the hell that was unleashed upon the empire in the wake of Manzikert, and at such a young age. Romania was assailed by a whole new combination of enemies, which the old generals, who were raised in the times of the Bulgar Slayer, knew nothing about. Alexius came to the throne at age 24 with a three-front war against Normans, Pechenegs, and Seljuk Turks, and came out on top of all of them by the end. His rivalry with Bohemond of Taranto came early in his reign. They duked it out over the years with their wits and arms, but in the end, it was Alexius who learned from his previous dealings with the Normans and triumphed, which was a boss moment. And I think I've said this a lot by now, but with Alexius, we essentially saw a new phase of Roman history. Its last phase, based on aristocratic kinship, ridiculously long court titles, playing Latins against Turks and Turks against Latins, proniars, nepotism, and fanciest clothes, and legitimacy ultimately deriving from the Komneni. Much of this is due to Alexius, who found the empire in the worst state possible and did CPR on it until it came back pumping. All the while, his reign was beset with all sorts of internal conflicts, from conspiracies to heretics to public discontent, but he managed to stay emperor for 37 years despite all of that. How competent do you have to be able to parkour through 4 decades? And yes, I'm counting all the services in Anatolia Alexius rendered to the empire before he became emperor. 4 decades of constant strife and trouble, to suffer humiliating defeats without losing hope or all popular support, to come back stronger than before and conquer all those problems. We all know his historian daughter Anna Komneni is biased towards her father, but we can all agree that she is right to be biased, having witnessed firsthand all of Alexius' travails. Yeah, she is right to call him one of the best Roman emperors. But since this is my list, I have one more to present to you that I think went through even more than Alexius, thus being even more capable than him, even if he achieved less. And he is, drumroll please, Number 1. Manuel II Paleologos. Yes, there he is, my personal favorite Roman emperor. And I know I'm not the only one with this opinion. If you're watching this, you know who you are, and know that you are cultured. Where do I even begin? It would be unfair if I just let you go watch my 2 videos on Manuel's reign or read the article I wrote for medievalist.net on Manuel's travels to know why he was amazing. Let's boil it down to the essentials. That is to say, keep my yapping to a minimum. See, I literally do not know of a worse time to rule the empire other than the reign of Manuel. His father, Ioannis V, had mismanaged it so miserably and tried to beg for help from the Latins even more miserably that it was a miracle Constantinople was still standing. The Ottomans were riding high on their streak in conquering the Balkans, and the Romans were just so depressed and beat that they had lost the will to fight. Corruption and treachery were rampant, the scholars and ecclesiastics were divided so poignantly over the issue of union. Yet, after some time under Manuel, we get a small imperial revival, and when the Romans met their fall some decades later, they were replenished enough to do it with the utmost dignity. How did this happen? In my personal reflections while studying the reign of Manuel, I concluded that Manuel owed his success to his mastery of temperance, one of the 4 cardinal virtues. He might have been so much more accomplished had he been born some years earlier, but if he didn't rule in the time that he did, then the Roman Empire would have died pathetically by the late 14th century, without a doubt. So he was a man perfectly fitted to his era. Every other sovereign ruled with excess, and here came Manuel with his temperance. In politics, he was not overly submissive like Ioannis V, nor was he so hawkish like Ioannis VIII. Manuel excelled in diplomacy and tried to maintain friendly contact with all his neighbors without sacrificing fundamental Roman dignity. And he did that. He balanced everyone's interests, but always kept Roman interests at the top. So he might sometimes gift holy relics to European monarchs one day, but supply ships to Ottoman princelings on the next. He managed the scales of power very well and ensured the survival and revival of his empire. Once Manuel was a proud youth, he defied the will of Sultan Murad and paid Thessaloniki as the price. But once he matured and saw the reality of the powerlessness of the Roman state, he never forgot it. And he leveraged Romania's last advantage, the soft power and diplomacy, to its max. He corresponded a lot with medieval states, and he never rushed to decisions, not even when the first Ottoman siege of Constantinople was strangling the city. He was calculated in all his decisions, and he took an incredible risk by leaving his capital to ask for help from the West at that critical moment. But all of his past carefulness was repaid with a miracle, the surprise delivery of the city by the advent of Timur. So in this case, Manuel's patience also paid off, while his nemesis Bayezid became a victim of his own haste. This was why Bayezid's empire collapsed, while Manuel brought some new life to his. By that time, Manuel was already in his old age, but he continued actively acting in the interests of the empire until the 70s, so that in the early 15th century, the Italians and Turks started to really see him as the most experienced statesman in their sphere, and Manuel II Paleologos became a renowned figure on the international stage, like Manuel I Komnenos. But so much for Manuel the statesman. What about Manuel the intellectual? He was trained by the best, Dimitrios Kytonis. He loved letters all his life, so much that he used his 3 years in prison to keep reading out theology. He had a wide circle of friends and contacts, all of them the wisest among the Romans in secular and ecclesiastical learning. And that is a completely different life Manuel led, apart from that of his role as emperor. And in that, too, he showed his temperance, because, as I've said, the Roman intellectual scene was highly divisive by that point. We have Catholic converts and Orthodox loyalists, hesychasts and anti-Palamists, even impossible crypto-pagan Neoplatonists like Dionysios Platon. It's hard to not debate when you meet someone who has an education in those days, but Manuel was on good terms with most of them. He listened to opinions from all sides. He was open to new ideas, although he himself was staunchly orthodox. All the while, he produced personal writings, on a great volume, with his own musings on life and religion and governance. He balanced all his intellectual activities with his political ones, and for that, I think he deserves the title of Philosopher King, along with rare emperors like Marcus Aurelius or Julian the Apostate. Manuel was guided by the wisdom of the ancients and his own medieval experience. And in the end, we have a truly wonderful phenomenon in his person. He was a Renaissance man before the Renaissance, which does owe a large debt to him and his scholars too. He helped give the Paleologan dynasty and the Roman Empire a decent finish after a few terrible emperors. I know Manuel II isn't the most popular, or hell, even the most well-known Vasilevs, but I sure hope I can bring some much-needed attention to this underrated figure. And that's my top 10 list. Are you still there? I do yap a lot more than your average Roman YouTuber when ranking, so I won't do a top 10 worst list, but I will answer the question about who is the worst emperor in my opinion. Let's see. The difficult thing about finding really bad Eastern Roman emperors is that, well, there are hardly any. We don't really get crazy lunatics like Caligula or Nero in the medieval period. Most of the bad emperors then were just mildly competent men forced by bad circumstances or incredibly well-meaning idiots. It's not too fair to judge like this, but if I have to pick one really bad apple out of a bunch, it's a basic answer, but I'd say Phocas. The damage he did to the empire was larger than that of the Ducai or Angeli, and Phocas didn't even have the excuse of having a dead or bad predecessor to justify his coming to power. He literally staged a coup against Emperor Mauricius, then slaughtered his whole family just because he couldn't stand the cold beyond the Danube. All the years of campaigning against Avars and Slavs wasted, and a final war, which exhausted both the Roman and Persian empires, started. Phocas caused so much harm to the generations of stable succession in the Eastern Empire, but he did two good things: bring back beards to fashion for Roman emperors and see the rise of the Heraclean dynasty. So there's a silver lining even there. But yes, I think Phocas is the worst of the bunch. And that is my ranking of Eastern Roman emperors and empresses. Don't get too mad at me for skipping your favorites. Comment below how your list would be, and let's all have a discussion instead of a fight. The Romans had enough civil wars. That's one thing we don't need to learn from them. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with the final episode of the Q&A.